All right, let's dive into a topic that is really a fundamental part of being human, gender. It shapes who we are, our place in the world, and how we see everything around us, right from the very beginning. So, let's get into it.
You know, it all starts with a question I think we've all asked at some point. Just think about it. Why do we walk into a toy store and see one aisle drenched in pink and another in blue? Why are some things for boys and others for girls? This very simple question really blows the doors open on the whole psychology of gender.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start by getting our definitions straight. Then we'll jump right into that classic debate, nature versus nurture. From there, we'll tackle stereotypes, look at how gender changes as we grow up, and finally we'll explore where our understanding is headed, which is way beyond just two boxes.
Okay, first up, let's define gender. Before we can really get into the juicy debates, we all have to be on the same page, speaking the same language. So let's lock in these core ideas.
So let's start with the biggest, broadest term, gender itself. In psychology, this just refers to the characteristics that we, as a society, associate with being male and female. Think of it as the giant umbrella that covers everything else we're about to talk about.
Now, under that umbrella, we find gender identity. And this is so important. This is not about your body. It's your own internal, personal sense of who you are. It's that deep-down feeling and acceptance of your own gender. It's what's inside.
So if identity is internal, then gender roles are all about the external. You can think of these as the social scripts we get handed. They're the unwritten and sometimes very written rules about how people are supposed to think, act, and feel, all based on their gender.
Okay, so we have these roles floating around in society. How do we learn them? Well, that process has a name, gender typing. It's how each of us, as we grow up, picks up and internalizes what our culture defines as a masculine or feminine role. And that, of course, leads us to one of the biggest questions in all of psychology. Where does this all come from? Is it baked into our biology, or is it something we learn? This brings us to the great debate, nature, nurture, and mind.
Let's start with the nature argument. This perspective looks at biological influences, starting with the very basics, our genes, and, maybe most importantly for this conversation, our hormones.
There are two main classes of sex hormones you hear about, estrogens and androgens, like testosterone. We usually think of estrogens for females and androgens for males. But, and this is key, the reality is, everybody has both. They're just present in different amounts. These are the chemical messengers that literally build our bodies.
And the evidence that biology plays a huge role here is, well, it's pretty powerful. If you look at rare conditions, you can see just how strong these hormones can be. For instance, females with a condition called CAH get exposed to unusually high levels of androgens before they're born, and they often grow up to prefer more stereotypically male toys and activities. On the flip side, you have androgen-insensitive males. Genetically, they are XY, but their bodies can't use androgens. They typically look and identify as female. These cases really show that our biology lays down a powerful foundation for our gender.
But biology is not the whole story, not even close. So now let's flip the coin and look at the nurture and mind side of things. This is all about how our social world and our own brains actively build our sense of gender. A really big idea here is social role theory. Psychologist Alice Eagley basically said, hey, maybe the differences we see aren't innate. Maybe they're just a result of the different jobs and positions men and women have held throughout history. So because men historically had more power, they developed more dominant traits. It suggests our behavior is just an adaptation to the social structure around us.
So how does this learning actually happen? Social cognitive theory breaks it down into a really simple three-step process. First, we observe. Kids are like little sponges, watching parents, friends, and what's on TV. Second, we imitate. We copy the gendered behavior we see. And third, we get reinforcement. We're praised for acting like a boy or like a girl, and gently corrected when we don't. It's a non-stop feedback loop, right from day one.
And this is where the mind part comes in. We aren't just passively soaking this stuff up. Gender schema theory says that our brains are actively trying to make sense of it all. We build these mental maps, or schemas, about gender. And once that schema is built, it acts like a filter for everything we see and do, guiding us to act in ways that fit our culture's gender map. So you've got nature, nurture, and your own mind all stirring the pot. What's the actual result? What does this all add up to in the real world? Let's talk about separating the stereotypes from the reality.
You've seen these before, right? These are the classic stereotypes. Masculine traits are often called instrumental. being a go-getter, being aggressive. And feminine traits are called expressive, being warm, sensitive, nurturing. These are the deep-seated cultural beliefs about what men and women are supposed to be like.
But, and this is a huge but, what does the data actually say? Well, here's the reality check. Psychologist Janet Shibley-Hyde did this massive analysis of hundreds of studies, and her conclusion was pretty shocking. On most psychological traits, men and women are incredibly similar. The differences we're so obsessed with, they've been, in her words, greatly exaggerated.
Now, another thing to remember is that gender isn't some fixed point. It's not something you just get when you're a kid and then you're done. It's a journey. So let's look at how our relationship with gender actually evolves throughout our lives.
You can see these key moments at different stages. In childhood, the playground is basically gender school. Your friends are the teachers and they are tough graders, especially on boys. Then, in adolescence, a lot of people feel what's called gender intensification. As puberty hits, the social pressure to conform to those traditional roles really ramps up. And even in adulthood, we can see patterns emerge, like in the way we talk. Some people favor rapport talk, which is all about building connection, while others use report talk, which is more about trading information.
And all of this brings us to right now, to our final section, moving beyond the binary. Because our understanding of gender, both scientifically and culturally, is expanding way beyond just two simple, neat categories.
This evolution has given us a much richer vocabulary. We have terms like androgyny, which describes having a mix of positive feminine and masculine traits. We have transgender, for someone whose gender identity is different from the one they were assigned at birth, and cisgender, for someone whose identity aligns with it. And what I think is one of the most fascinating ideas from neuroscience is the concept of a gender mosaic, the idea that no brain is purely male or female, but that each of our brains is a totally unique mix of different features.
So, that leaves us here with a pretty big question to chew on. If everything from biology to psychology is telling us that gender is less like a simple on-off switch and more like a complex, beautiful mosaic, what does that actually mean for our future, for our society, for our relationships, and for how we understand ourselves?